There are 7 deadly sins, and for each one, there is a billion-dollar scam that embodies it perfectly, starting with the sin of envy, and the man who wanted to be Elon Musk so badly that he faked an entire truck company to do it. Back in 2014, Trevor Milton founded a company called Nikola, and if that name sounds familiar, it should. Tesla is named after Nikola Tesla. Milton named his company Nikola because he wanted to be the other half of Tesla's legacy. He didn't want to compete with Elon Musk, he wanted to be him, and for a while, it worked. In January 2018, Milton posted a video on social media titled Nikola 1 Electric Semi-Truck in Motion, showing this massive hydrogen truck cruising smoothly down a highway. It got over 260,000 views, and the internet did not take long to find out the truth. I suppose I can design a Starship Enterprise replica, push it off a cliff, record it falling, and say I've made a deep spacecraft too. Honestly, what the F? The commercial was still deceptive on every level. His cheap and Weasley explanation should have been written in the commercial, but this wasn't even the worst part, because when they got caught, Nikola's response was somehow even more insulting.
Truck was real, but we didn't use its own power. We just used it in a commercial, and we let it roll down the hill for a cinematic effect. And I told the truth, right? So what does Bloomberg do? They come out with an article and they cut out my answer.
This is weird. So he faked an ad, said he faked an ad, and claims Bloomberg lied in saying he faked the ad. This has got to be the most pathetic attempt to unadmit something ever. So did Milton take responsibility? Did he admit he had faked it? No. Even at sentencing, standing in a federal courtroom, he was in tears asking for probation, saying he never intended to mislead anyone. The judge didn't buy it for a second. He was sentenced to 4 years. Investors lost over $660 million. Nikola's stock collapsed from $80 to under $1, and as Milton left the courtroom, he told reporters he was confident his conviction would be overturned. It wasn't confidence, it was delusion. The same delusion that made him think he could become the next Elon Musk by pushing a truck down a hill. Did Musk ever post a video of Tesla car on the move, featuring an unpowered Tesla rolling downhill under gravity power? I don't think Musk or Tesla ever did. But Nikola sure did with one of their supposed trucks. They can mince words all they want, but I see fraud. They should have named the product Nikola Soapbox Derby instead of Nikola Truck. But while Milton's envy led him to fake a company, our next scammer was so lazy she didn't even bother building the technology at all. In 2014, a German-Bulgarian woman named Ruja Ignatova walked onto a stage and told the world she had created the next Bitcoin. She called it OneCoin. And within 2 years, she wasn't just presenting at conferences. She was filling stadiums, actual stadiums, thousands of people on their feet, music blasting, fire shooting from the stage, like she was a rock star, not a crypto founder.
1, 2, 3. Applause, please.
And these weren't just crypto investors. These were ordinary people, families, teachers, workers, people in 175 countries who had never touched cryptocurrency in their lives, heard about OneCoin from someone they trusted and decided to put their money in. Some invested their entire savings. One woman in London put in 10,000 euros after a family friend brought her to a networking event.
You see, Ruja, I just thought she was such a clever woman. I was 10,000 euros, but of course, to speak to family, it's a collective loss of over 250,000 euros.
But here's what makes this the laziest scam in the history of financial crime. OneCoin wasn't a cryptocurrency. It didn't have a blockchain. It didn't have a trading market. It had absolutely nothing underneath it. She didn't even bother building the technology she was selling. She just collected money, showed people a number going up on a screen, and called it a coin. OneCoin had no blockchain, no real crypto coin, and no trading market, thus immediately rendering it far better for society than any other crypto coin. Don't sell! Hodl your OneCoin. It can only go up, and the internet had every right to mock it. Because what came out next proved it was even worse than anyone imagined. In leaked internal emails between Ruja and her co-founder, the woman who stood on those stages and told millions of people their money was safe said something very different in private, in her own words. To her own partner, in her own words, Ruja Ignatova, in an internal email to her co-founder, "We are not mining actually, but telling people shit." That's not an accusation from a journalist. That's not a prosecutor's claim. That is the founder of OneCoin, in a private email, admitting to her own co-founder that the entire thing was a lie. She knew it was fake, she always knew, and she kept selling it anyway. And by the time it collapsed, OneCoin had stolen over $4 billion from victims across the globe. Investors in rural Uganda lost their homes.
Konstantin Ignatova came here in Uganda to promote OneCoin. Very many people lost their money through us. Most of the people sold off their valuables, their land, their cars. Others even went ahead and got loans.
Families in Pakistan were wiped out. People who had saved for decades, who had never gambled on anything in their lives, trusted this woman because someone they loved told them to, and they got nothing back, not a single cent. But while $4 billion was disappearing from ordinary people's bank accounts, Ruja had already planned her next move, because in another leaked email, she literally wrote down her own exit strategy. Option number 1 on her list. Ignatova's option number 1 on her own exit strategy list. Take the money and run and blame someone else for this. She wrote that in an email to her co-founder. And that is exactly what she did. On October 25th, 2017, Ruja was supposed to speak at a OneCoin event in Lisbon. Instead, she boarded a Ryanair flight from Bulgaria to Greece. And she vanished completely. She has not been seen or heard from since. The FBI put her on their 10 most wanted fugitives list. The reward for information leading to her arrest is $5 million. Some reports say she got extensive plastic surgery before she disappeared. Others believe something far darker happened. My bet is she was a front for some Eastern EU mafia group, and now rests in a concrete-filled barrel at the bottom of the Black Sea, with all the money taking multiple round trips through offshore banks. Nobody knows. And the truth is, the system that was supposed to prevent this barely even tried. Because the real joke isn't that OneCoin had no blockchain. The real joke is what would have happened if she had built one. If only OneCoin had bothered to create any sort of blockchain token, they'd be just like every other altcoin and she could keep the billions. Maybe pay a trivial fine to a regulator somewhere. In the end, Ruja Ignatova was too lazy to build a real product, too arrogant to think she'd get caught, and too smart to stick around when the walls started closing in. She is the only person on this list who might never face justice. But while Ruja was too lazy to build anything real, our next scammer went all in on building a fantasy so beautiful that people couldn't resist paying for it. In 2017, a 25-year-old college dropout named Billy McFarland convinced some of the most famous women in the world to sell a fantasy on his behalf. Bella Hadid, Emily Ratajkowski, Kendall Jenner, all of them on a private island in the Bahamas. Crystal clear water, yachts, gourmet food, the most exclusive music festival the world had ever seen. Tickets started at $1,200. VIP packages went up to $250,000, and people couldn't throw their money fast enough. The video was the ultimate act of seduction. It didn't sell a festival, it sold a feeling, a life most people could never afford, and thousands of them paid for it without asking a single question. But if they had looked at the man behind it all, they might have thought twice. Billy McFarland looks like a dude who would get drunk on night 1 of The Bachelorette and fall in the pool after grabbing her ass. And even the models who promoted it had no idea what they were actually selling.
People said that I was scamming them and I was part of it and I was in on it. And I was like, absolutely not. I'm getting all these photos and videos and don't come, it's a disaster and all this stuff.
Because when thousands of ticket holders actually arrived on the island, what they found wasn't a luxury festival. It was a disaster zone. No villas, no gourmet food, no performers, just half-built FEMA tents, soaking wet mattresses, feral dogs roaming the grounds, and complete chaos.
There was no electricity. We were in the dark in the camp. People's luggage started getting stolen, passports, wallets. There was no air. We're like, we need air. The windows were closed. It was hot, it was humid.
Budget, 98% social media, 2% tents and sandwiches. And then came the moment that would define this entire disaster forever. One photo, 2 slices of bread, a single piece of cheese, a sad side salad, served in a styrofoam container. That was the gourmet dining experience that people paid up to $250,000 for. And the internet didn't just notice it. The internet made it the most famous sandwich in history. But what made it even worse was McFarland's response. Because in a podcast interview after everything collapsed, Billy actually tried to explain the cheese sandwich away.
Why were the sandwiches like such a thing?
Yeah, the food actually wasn't bad. Like the food was totally, it wasn't 5 stars advertised, but the food was like definitely pretty good. And the story is that 2 kids were high and went up to Andy King and said, "Hey man, all I want is a cheese sandwich." So he made that, like, those 2 guys a cheese sandwich.
That was his defense. 2 boys who were high ordered a bad sandwich and the photo went viral. Meanwhile, thousands of people were stranded on an island with no electricity. And even the CEO of Jerry Media, the marketing company behind Fyre, couldn't believe the irony of what happened. A couple of powerful models posting an orange tile is essentially what built this entire festival. And then a kid with probably 400 followers posted a picture of cheese on toast that trended and effectively ripped down the festival. Supermodels built it. A cheese sandwich destroyed it. But behind the memes, real people were hurt, and not just the ticket holders. Local Bahamian workers who spent weeks building the infrastructure, cooking the food, and setting up the stages were never paid a single dollar. One woman, a local caterer named Marianne Rowley, lost over $50,000 of her own savings feeding festival staff and workers. She was never reimbursed. Maybe Kendall Jenner, Hailey Baldwin, and Bella Hadid could donate the payment they received for their #Fyre Festival Instagram post to the locals who never got paid for their work on #Fyre Festival. And when journalists later caught up with Bella Hadid to ask about the festival that had her name all over it, the response told you everything.
How was the Fyre Festival?
In October 2018, Billy McFarland was sentenced to 6 years in federal prison. But the story didn't end there, because after serving his time, McFarland was released. And the very first thing he did was announce Fyre Festival 2. But the internet responded exactly the way you'd expect. How can there be version 2 if there was no version 1? We can turn the simulation off now, it's been a good run. In the end, Billy McFarland didn't sell a festival. He sold a fantasy. And the scariest part isn't that he got caught. It's that he got out, announced he was doing it again, and somehow there are still people willing to buy tickets. But while McFarland built his fraud on a fantasy, our next scammer built hers on something far more dangerous. She built it on pride. Elizabeth Holmes dropped out of Stanford at 19 with one goal: not to build a company, to become Steve Jobs. She wore the black turtleneck. She put her face on the cover of Forbes. She told the world she had invented a machine that could run hundreds of blood tests from a single drop of blood. And she delivered every word of that promise in a deep, deliberate voice that made her sound like she already knew she was going to change the world. Henry Kissinger sat on her board. George Shultz vouched for her. James Mattis defended her. Rupert Murdoch invested $125 million. The most powerful men in America looked at this 19-year-old dropout and saw a genius. None of them thought to check whether the machines actually worked. Theranos was valued at $9 billion. Holmes became the youngest self-made female billionaire in America. And for years, nobody questioned a thing. Because questioning Elizabeth Holmes meant questioning the future of healthcare. And nobody wanted to be the person who stood in the way of that. But there was one thing about Elizabeth Holmes that people noticed long before the fraud was ever exposed: her voice. Because the deep, commanding tone that she used in every interview, every speech, every board meeting was not real.
Over the last 11 years, we've reinvented the traditional laboratory infrastructure. Turned out he had a nub on his elbow, and we talked to our lab team and they said, okay, you can do...
She admitted in court that the deep, gravelly voice she used for years while running Theranos was a character she invented at age 19 to be taken seriously. A character. She ran a $9 billion company with a fake voice like she was playing a villain in a school play. A character. Invented at 19. Performed for over a decade. That's not a CEO. That's an actress who never broke character. And if the voice was fake, the question becomes what else was? The answer? Everything. The technology that Holmes promised would revolutionize healthcare didn't work. It never worked. And she knew it didn't work, because behind the scenes, Theranos was secretly pulling blood samples out of their own broken machines and running them through traditional lab equipment made by other companies. The results that patients received were not from the revolutionary Edison device. They were from the same standard tests that already existed everywhere else. Except these results were less accurate, and real patients were getting results that were dangerously wrong. People were being told they had conditions they didn't have. Others were being told they were healthy when they weren't. One patient was incorrectly told she had suffered a miscarriage. Another received a wrong HIV result. These weren't tech glitches. These were people's lives. And when journalist John Carreyrou of the Wall Street Journal started publishing investigations that exposed all of this, Elizabeth Holmes didn't apologize. She didn't step down. She went on CNBC's Mad Money and said,
This is what happens when you work to change things. And first they think you're crazy, then they fight you, and then all of a sudden you change the world.
But the internet finished the quote for her. First, they think you're crazy. Then they fight you. Then they indict you. Then they find you guilty. Then you go down in history as a disgrace. In January 2022, Elizabeth Holmes was found guilty of defrauding investors. She is currently serving 11 years in a federal penitentiary. And when you step back and look at the full picture of what she built, the internet summed it up better than any prosecutor ever could. Check fake Steve Jobs turtlenecks. Check fake working technology. Check fake blood tests that injured patients. At what point does Silicon Valley stop calling this visionary and start calling it what it is, a woman cosplaying as a CEO, while real people got cancer misdiagnoses? But the woman who compared herself to Steve Jobs forgot one detail. Steve Jobs actually built things that worked. But while Holmes's pride convinced her she was a visionary, our next scammer's gluttony made him consume everything in sight. Between 2009 and 2014, a Malaysian businessman named Joe Low stole $4.5 billion from his own country's sovereign wealth fund, a fund called 1MDB, money that was meant to develop Malaysia's economy, money that was meant to build infrastructure, create jobs, and lift ordinary Malaysians out of poverty. And what Joe Low did with that money is the most obscene spending spree in the history of financial crime. He bought a $250 million mega yacht called the Equanimity. He threw birthday parties where Britney Spears and Usher performed private concerts for his friends.
A lot of you in this room know I like to plan my evenings and make sure that I always go to the best parties.
He bought paintings by Monet and Van Gogh. He gambled millions at Las Vegas casinos in a single sitting. He gifted a $325,000 Ferrari to Kim Kardashian as a wedding present. He gave $8 million in diamond jewelry to model Miranda Kerr. This man didn't just steal money, he consumed it, like a machine that couldn't be turned off. And in what might be the most ironic moment in the history of white-collar crime, Joe Low took $100 million of stolen Malaysian public money and invested it into the production of a Hollywood film, The Wolf of Wall Street, a movie about financial fraud funded by actual financial fraud. Imagine being a scammer using scam money to make a movie about a scammer, but then the scammer in question catches you in the scam. I'm convinced you made this up, LMAO. You couldn't write this. A real-life financial criminal funding a movie about financial criminals, starring Leonardo DiCaprio, directed by Martin Scorsese, and nominated for 5 Academy Awards, all paid for with money stolen from Malaysian teachers and workers and families who never saw a cent of it. And that's the part people forget. Behind every yacht and every diamond and every celebrity birthday party, there were real people on the other side of this. Ordinary Malaysians whose country was robbed from underneath them.
This fraud is unbelievable because Joe Low just stole billions of dollars almost overnight. The quantum of the money that was stolen is so huge it makes previous frauds look almost pedestrian by comparison.
As a Malaysian, my blood was boiling watching this video, realizing how much we got robbed. Because of 1MDB, Malaysia become world famous. That's great, world famous. For being robbed by their own government. And when investigators finally started closing in, when the US Department of Justice filed the largest asset recovery case in its history, when Leonardo DiCaprio had to return paintings, and Miranda Kerr had to return $8 million in jewelry, Joe Low didn't apologize. He didn't turn himself in. Through his lawyers, he released a statement insisting he had never done anything wrong. He called the allegations politically motivated. He called himself a target. The man who bought a $250 million yacht with stolen public money looked at the world and said he was the victim. The former Malaysian Prime Minister Najib Razak, who was deeply connected to the scheme, wasn't as lucky with his defense. Najib was convicted, sentenced to 15 years in prison. But Joe Low? He's never been caught. He's believed to be hiding somewhere in China, still free. In the end, Joe Low didn't just steal money, he devoured it. But while Low's gluttony consumed billions in luxury, our next scammer's greed consumed the life savings of thousands of ordinary people. For over 17 years, Bernie Madoff ran the largest Ponzi scheme in the history of the world. $65 billion. Not millions, not a few billion, $65 billion. And the way he did it was disturbingly simple. He promised investors steady, reliable returns of 10 to 12% year after year. He didn't promise anything crazy. He didn't promise 100% returns. He promised just enough to seem legitimate, and that was the genius of his greed. He didn't want to look rich, he wanted to look trustworthy, and he had the credentials to back it up. Before running his fund, Bernie Madoff had served as the chairman of the Nasdaq Stock Exchange. The man running the biggest fraud in history had once run one of the biggest stock markets in the world, and that title alone was enough to make everyone look the other way. He turned people away. He created artificial scarcity. People begged to give him their money, and once they were in, he never actually invested a single dollar. He used new investors' money to pay old investors for 17 years.
I think many people were seduced. We looked at the returns and said they're simply too good to be true.
And the strangest part? When the dot-com bubble burst in 2000 and the entire market collapsed, every other fund lost money, every single one, except Madoff's. His returns stayed perfectly steady, as if the market crashing had no effect on him at all. Through every recession, every correction, every panic. Madoff's numbers only went up. That alone should have ended it. But nobody wanted to be the person who questioned the golden goose. And the people who were getting those returns? They didn't want to ask questions, because asking questions meant the money might stop, and the money was too good to stop. Madoff investors, when the money was rolling in, the government needs to keep its nose out of our business. Madoff investors, when they found out they'd been scammed, the government should have known this was going on and stopped it.
You are the watchdog. You have totally and thoroughly failed in your mission.
But here's the part that turns this from a crime story into a systemic failure. Because there was one man who saw through everything, a financial analyst named Harry Markopolos. And he didn't just suspect Madoff was a fraud, he proved it with math.
You would never suspect him of fraud unless you knew the math. It took me 5 minutes to know that it was a fraud. It took me another almost 4 hours of mathematical modeling to prove that it was a fraud.
Markopolos didn't keep this to himself. He wrote a detailed report and sent it directly to the Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC, the one agency in America whose entire job is to catch exactly this kind of fraud. And they did nothing. So he sent it again, and they did nothing again.
May 2000, October 2001, October, November, and December 2005, then again June 2007, and finally April 2008. So 5 separate SEC submissions.
For years, this man handed the SEC the answer on a silver platter, and they ignored it every single time.
Unfortunately, as they didn't respond to my written submissions in 2000, 2001, 2005, 2007, and 2008, a fraud that should have been stopped at under $7 billion in 2000 has now grown to $50 billion.
There was no hard proof, so nobody started an investigation. Isn't that the point of an investigation? And when it finally collapsed in December 2008, with the financial crisis ripping through Wall Street and investors demanding their money back, Madoff couldn't keep the machine running any longer. He confessed to his sons. His sons called the FBI. And overnight, the former chairman of NASDAQ, the most trusted name in finance, became the most hated man in America. The devastation was beyond anything Wall Street had ever seen. Thousands of retirees lost everything. Entire charities were wiped out. Elie Wiesel's foundation, the man who survived the Holocaust and won the Nobel Peace Prize, lost $15.2 million. And Madoff's own son, Mark, could not live with the shame. He took his own life 2 years later. And the list of victims goes on.
What am I going to do? I was in my mid-70s already.
To lose your life savings, a house too. It's terrible.
I lost everything. I lost all my savings from my life savings from modeling and my inheritance from my mom. I trusted him with even my entire mom's inheritance, and now my mom is dead, and so is the money.
In June 2009, Bernie Madoff was sentenced to 150 years in federal prison, the maximum allowed. He died behind bars in April 2021. He was 82 years old. He never breathed free air again. And when people asked why Madoff, out of all the Wall Street criminals who have stolen and cheated and lied, was the one who actually went to prison, the internet had a very simple answer. You know why he's in jail? He stole from the rich. In the end, Madoff didn't steal money because he needed it. He stole it because he couldn't stop. That's what greed is. Not wanting more, needing more, and not being able to tell the difference.
And the choice he made was he could live with himself as a liar much more easily than he could live with himself as a failure.
But while Madoff's greed destroyed people's savings, our final sin destroyed something far more valuable. It destroyed human lives by the hundreds of thousands. In 1996, Purdue Pharma, owned by the Sackler family, launched a painkiller called OxyContin. And from the very beginning, they knew it was dangerously addictive. Internal documents showed they understood the risks. They launched it anyway. And then they did something that separates this sin from every other one on this list. They didn't just lie to investors. They didn't just lie to regulators. They lied to doctors. And doctors believed them. And patients trusted their doctors. And that chain of trust killed over 500,000 Americans. Purdue didn't leave the lying to chance. They built a system. They hired sales representatives, trained them with specific scripts, and sent them into doctors' offices across the country with one message. OxyContin is different. OxyContin is safer. The risk of addiction is less than 1%.
I think they knew that they were mismarketing it, and they continue to do so anyway because it really was all about profit.
It was all about profit. That's not an accusation from a journalist. That's a former employee, on camera, telling you exactly what happened inside those walls. They knew what they were selling. They knew what it would do, and they sold it anyway. Being a drug dealer is fine, as long as you're a corporation. And even after the first wave of addiction swept through American communities, even after the reports started coming in, even after it became impossible to ignore what OxyContin was doing to people, Purdue didn't stop. They doubled down.
Did this concept of pseudo-addiction come with studies backing it up?
We had no studies. We did not have any studies. That's the thing that was kind of disturbing, was that we didn't have studies to present to the doctor.
They kept selling, they kept training, they kept lying.
I was involved in a car accident. I was T-boned. I ended up having some prescribed OxyContin. I just got hooked on it, and then I realized only after the fact. I feel like I was deceived. I feel like I was cheated. I feel like I was lied to.
While families were watching their children, their parents, their husbands and wives disappear into addiction and never come back, while emergency rooms were overflowing, while morgues were running out of space, the Sackler family was extracting billions from Purdue Pharma and funneling it into offshore accounts, trusts, and personal luxury purchases. And they didn't start moving the money after the lawsuits came. They started years before, as if they always knew this day would arrive. They just wanted to make sure the money was gone before it did. Their personal fortune grew to over $10 billion, built on a body count that is still rising today. This made me so sad and so angry. My mom was a victim of this epidemic. I miss you, Mom. I'm so sorry they did this to you. That's not a statistic. That's a person with a mother who is gone. And there are hundreds of thousands of comments just like that one on every video, on every article, on every post about OxyContin. Real people, real families, real graves. In 2020, Purdue Pharma pleaded guilty to federal criminal charges. The Sacklers agreed to pay over $6 billion in settlements. Their name was stripped from every institution that once carried it proudly: the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Louvre, the Guggenheim, the Smithsonian. One by one, every museum, every university, every gallery that once proudly carried the Sackler name took it down. But taking a name off a wall doesn't bring back 500,000 people, and it doesn't put a single Sackler behind bars. But here's the part that should make you angrier than anything else in this video. Not a single member of the Sackler family has spent a single day in prison. Not one. They paid a fine that was a fraction of what they earned, and they walked away. Is it really justice when they make billions and are fined only millions? It's not justice. It's arithmetic, and the arithmetic says that if you're rich enough, you can buy your way out of anything, even 500,000 deaths. In the end, every sin on this list took something. Envy faked a truck. Sloth faked a cryptocurrency. Lust sold a fantasy. Pride faked a blood test. Gluttony consumed billions. Greed stole retirement savings. But wrath took 500,000 lives and walked away free. The question isn't which sin is the deadliest. We already know the answer. The question is, how many more have to die before we stop treating corporate crime differently than every other kind? If you enjoyed this video, let me know which sin shocked you the most in the comments. And be sure to check out our next video.